Hello, everybody. I'm George from Ireland. Thank you for coming back to my channel. And this is about Russia's plan for the winter of 2025, 2026. Now, surprisingly, I don't have a hotline to my old mucker, Vladimir, Vlad the Invader. Okay, we go way on back. But curiously, he doesn't share his most secret plans with me. So this is obviously going to be conjecture based on open sources. What I read from some of the mill bloggers, some Western sources, and things like that. So it's educated guesswork, and perhaps the Ruskies themselves don't know. Karl von Clausewitz saying no plan survives contact with the enemy because you have whatever sort of beautiful plan, and part of it is easier than you anticipated, some of it's more difficult. The enemy did something you hadn't foreseen, or whatever. So adaptability is the name of the game. Now the Ruskies tradition were not good at that, but they have got better this time, partly because they've had to. They have to muddle through, as they discovered in the Second World War, because all about rigidity, iron discipline, therefore predictability. Like the Germans in the Great Patriotic War, that's the Second World War, were able to outsmart them, partly because the Russians was just so slow to respond, or Soviets, I should say, then for the Red Army, because 25% of them were Ukrainian. USSR wouldn't have won without Ukraine. Because it was a close run thing at times, and if you take away 25% of your troops, you definitely would have lost most of those battles. Um, but because even if the Red Army commander could see what was happening and requested to whatever take evasive action to withdraw or to attack wherever, had to wait for the order to go several echelons up the chain of command, get a decision, pass all the way back down. And the Russian army today has not evolved much from that. Admittedly, communication's a lot faster, partly because the head honcho's got too much on his desk all at the same time, reacting to a very fluid situation and don't know what to believe and so on. So there's maybe even an overabundance of intelligence. People sometimes waste their time with trivialities and they miss the more important things. Can't see the wood for the trees, as the old expression goes. But significantly, it was announced only 2 days ago that the Russian government is are going to be able to call up reservists. Okay, so mobilize some of those on a rolling basis, which is to say do 6 months and they can go back to your ordinary job, and another lot do 6 months and go back to the ordinary job, and so on. Having said that, are they really going to do that? Maybe that's to ease people in. It's boiling a frog. And remember that their annual draft, or they do a biennial draft, is a spring and an autumn one. They said they're going to draft 160,000, which is the most for over 10 years. Considering the people being drafted now, they were born in about 2006. So although that's a fairly big age cohort, early 90s Russian birth rate was very low, partly because the economic situation was dire and the Russians murdered a lot of their kids before they were born. Economy began to pick up in the late 90s. 2006 was a fairly was fairly good years into the late noughties. Obviously gets worse after 2014, but that people born about 2014 won't be conscripted for several years yet because they're too young. But it's mainly they're just having to conscript more people. Now there are exemptions for serious medical disability, or some people got educational exemptions. That's normally if you're wealthy, you can get it, and so forth. The other way they fill this roster is by pressurizing prisoners as our military contracts. Well, there are very few of those left. Those who are remotely useful to the army have already joined the army, often been killed, wounded, sometimes released from military service, and put them in a more advantageous position than volunteers, which is grossly unjust, offering big enlistment bounties, but those have gone down because they just can't afford them. So the reservists, those who've done whatever military service, being recalled to the colours. They've done this before to some extent. So even for very big enlistment bonuses, they're not getting many people to do so. So the Cabinet Ministers Commission on Legislative Activity approved that. So the Ministry of Defence had requested this. So it's got two levels of reserve, up to 2 million people on the active reserves, according to official data. Now, that is presumably a lie, like all their statistics, so it won't be as good as that. It'll be significantly less than that. I don't want to go for pure guesswork and just make it up. All right. So they given information for Q1 of 2025, and they said that they recruited 90,000 people in the first 3 months of 2025. Yeah. So why they're having to mobilize these reservists, which they didn't have to do so before, and they're not declaring war on Russia, sorry, on Ukraine yet. I thought they were going to do so a few months into the war, which would have given a greater legal basis to do this. The other thing is obviously the Russian government will violate its own law on a huge scale every single day, but then they show this pedantic adherence to procedure and documentation. I remember reading 10 Days That Shook the World by John Reed, and he wrote about that Russian reverence for documents. And I remember it where you're documentov, and so on. Oh, so you have to have paper trail, even if it's forged, even if the signatures are forged or whatever, is somehow a hoax. They really believe in having bits of paper. Remember, he was running a time when most people were illiterate. Okay, so they will call up these people. Why? Because they don't have volunteers, and they've lost so many people they can't be replaced. Obviously, this will have a negative impact on the economy. They're already over 1 million workers short, very short in agriculture, and it's getting worse as natural attrition. People dying and retiring, a little bit of emigration still. Those who wanted to emigrate because of the war, they've largely gone already. Other things, the xenophobic campaign against guest workers, mostly from some former Soviet republics like Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, to a lesser extent, Azerbaijan, Armenia, um, Turkmenistan. So fewer of those coming and suffered to racialism, all these incredibly restrictive regulations about their what allowed to do, they must do, they can be fined for this and that, and produce documents and taken to whatever migration centers and deported for anything. And they're really important in taxi driving, getting people to work in remote, inhospitable regions that Russians don't want to work in, often doing the lower paid, dirtier jobs as cleaners, as construction workers, as farm laborers, and so forth. So the cruciality that's in several sectors can't be overstated, especially for a country with a demographic death spiral is even worse than in Western countries. And obviously, Putin has even aggravated that. So what you gonna do? Admittedly, if the war ends today and you demobilize over 1 million men, and they'd all be on the job market at once. Okay, would that solve that problem? But then I think the job market, they wouldn't necessarily want to work in those sectors anyway. A lot of people who have post-traumatic stress disorder, who've learned nothing to do but kill, they've learned to do nothing but kill. And violence has become normalized for them. They've been desensitized to this kind of stuff. There are always problems reintegrating people after major wars like that. So they're going to carry on driving against Pokrovsk. They've been trying to have that for months, and I don't see much sign that they're gonna get it. And indeed, a lot of Russian troops were recently encircled in the Donbass. Are they going to be obliged to surrender? I think trying to break through to them and rescue them, which they may well do, is the priority. There don't seem to be any major offensive plan. They haven't made major offensives in the winters in those wars so far. They might just keep hammering away somewhere in this front, trying to make incremental gains a few hundred meters a day, but no dramatic breakthrough. And of course, trying to target the Ukrainian energy infrastructure, freeze people into submission. They've tried this for a few years, is caused major headaches, is always failed. Why would they succeed when it has never succeeded before? Admittedly, they're doing bigger and bigger drone strikes. The Ukrainians, are finding it hard to cope with this, but they're increasingly connected to the European electric grid. There are ways for people to stay alive if they don't have heating for hours or even days, being provided with with winter clothing, absolute zero suits, other things you can put up in the house, tents or whatever, or gas cookers. I know it's not ideal, but to generate some sort of heat. So I don't think it's going to work, though. Yeah, it will cause serious problems. And Russia, in some ways, on the back foot, with more and more of the refineries hit with something like 28% of their oil refinery capacity taken out. Now they can repair that, but to repair these things can take a few weeks. I mean, at this rate, within a few months, all their refineries will be taken out. Now, I don't think the Ukrainians will ever manage that, partly because the easy to hit ones have been hit. Now, there's no such thing as absolute security. Russia can't have air defense everywhere. They have to prioritize near the front line, major cities, major military units, or installations like tank factories. And so there are just too many refineries, and these are often several square kilometers. They're too big to protect everything. And if there is a drone strike in the right place, it'll cause a very big explosion, a huge conflagration. So some of the ones are just so far away, are too well protected. Maybe they're not protected themselves near other well protected sites. So I think that's where the low hanging fruit has largely been picked. I don't think the Ukrainians will ever get near taking away 100% of their capacity. Might get maybe double where they are now at best, but there is a shortage of civilian fuel. The price is going up. It's hurting people. It's annoying people. It's bad for the economy because your drive to work or anything, construction, agriculture, they're all running short of or fuel. But obviously, the military is prioritized. But this is bringing home to the Russian civilian population. This is not a cost-free war. You will pay a price. You will suffer. This is what the Ukrainians are going through. We never did this to you before. End the war, and this won't happen. You stop, we'll stop. So yeah, Russia is suffering because of that. But I mean, now there's little indication this will bring them to the negotiating table. I suppose that the totality of the casualties at the front, the economy gradually being squeezed, the blowing up the refineries and so on, and it increasingly hard to replace losses. And not only lost troops, obviously tanks, howitzers, armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, ordinary vehicles, having to use motorbikes, golf carts, anything, horses to try and get across to no man's land. The Ukrainians are really good at using drones to take people out, and the Ukrainians got a very formidable drone sector. So they're always trying to overmaster each other with technology. Will the Tomahawks come along? I reckon they won't, because Trump always chickens out, and he's been humming and hawing about it for ages. Now the Ruskies say, "Oh, there's a big escalation." They said that about everything since 2014. Any equipment's been in escalation, and they've done almost nothing. And all right, they violated NATO airspace with their drones and their warplanes and so on. And NATO has been found wanting. Is a resolutionist plane. It's got no backbone. It could have shot these down, especially unarmed drones, and then they could never use that drone again to violate NATO airspace or anything else. It would show firmness, and the Russians might conclude it's not worth it. Well, if they're going to do this and not pay a price, why shouldn't they continue? Go further and further and more drones. And it's not one drone going 1 kilometer into NATO airspace. There'll be several drones going tens of kilometers into NATO airspace. So for them, it's worth it. You do the cost benefit analysis. Whatever intelligence they've garnered, whatever weakness and division they've managed to sow, they haven't paid a price for it. So therefore, in a completely rational calculus, it's the right thing to do for them to continue. And they'll always deny, no, no, we didn't do it, and then point the finger, blame the Ukrainians or something like that. So I don't see major changes this winter. Just grinding on. It's attritional war has been for Ukraine and Russia for a long time. But is this going to turn in Ukraine's favor? Only if Trump decides to give him tomahawks, which I don't think he'll do. Now, he really is hacked off Putin, but he's very, very feeble and cowardly towards Putin. Right. So, what do you think? Thanks for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, then at PayPal, georgecannon7@gmail.com. Goodbye.